Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So it's been brought to my attention that this companion actually works. And well, it actually works better than you may think. It's a little bit broken in my opinion, and will most likely get fixed in the near future. So keep that in mind throughout this video. This companion was initially released way back in the Winter Festival, and it has the ability of Intimidating Bellow, which should decrease the damage of nearby minions, standard and elite enemies by 10%. And then with solo and mini bosses, it should decrease their damage by 3%. When I initially tested this, it didn't seem to work in any of my tests. But recently, someone out there did test it, didn't really make it public knowledge, but it was brought to the attention of other players, and people did ask me to retest. In particular, credit to Aragon for tagging me and asking me to go and test this. Apologies that it took this long, but I'm finally getting there and getting a good solid test in. But you can see that these companions can give you this debuff, the Intimidating Bellow. It even appears to stack. We're gonna have to check that out. Now, how effective is this? Just by the tooltip there from the buff, it says 10 or 3%. So you don't really know until you sum up the math and do the numbers. So I jumped in PvP with a bunch of others here who have this companion. I attack them and trigger all the companions to attack me. Then I can choose one of them, get my damage on them without the buff, so I make sure they don't have the companions, and then I get them to summon the companions. I get the debuff, and then I attack. So I check my damage without them, and then with them, and then with 1 stack, 2 stack, and even 3 stacks to see if that works like that. And well, very interestingly, it turns out this buff works, and in PvP here, it gives a 10% damage reduction per stack. I have my little test document here and we can see the numbers. So we get our base damage there, which is just here 5,536. And then we get with one of the Riotous Roths, and then that's our math here, and we can see our damage is getting reduced down to 4,982, which checks out with a 10% reduction. You're gone from a multiplier of just 1 down to a multiplier of 0.9, as that's 1 minus 10%. 90% basically. So you're only dealing 90% of your original damage. And that is correct, what we're seeing. We then checked it with 2 players. And this also allows us to find out the math. Does it add up to be reduced down to like 80%? No. Your damage will be multiplicative reduction. So it's 90% multiplied by 90%. And so you end up with an 81% multiplier instead of just an 80% multiplier, which would be even lower damage. So we end up with 4,484 from the original up here with 2 stacks. And then it's the same math with 3 stacks, and that does work too. So you're reducing it all the way from the original of here down to just 4,000. So yeah, this companion pretty broken. You could have a trial, 10 people, everybody use this companion, and I believe the boss would end up only dealing like 35% of their original damage. That would be pretty busted, and that's completely feasible right now. If you want to get some easy completions, if you're struggling with the damage output of bosses in certain content, I mean, have everybody run the Riotous Rothe. This again will inevitably get fixed. Just putting it in an Excel sheet to confirm, yeah. Multiplying 10 0.9s by each other, you get, 34.87%. You could reduce the boss's overall damage down to this much of its original damage output. That is pretty insane. But does it work against bosses? Because these guys here are just players in just PvP. Did I actually check versus a boss? And yes, I did. So here we just have this boss dummy attack us. We make sure it's attacking us, and we just summon a regular companion for the base test. And then we go on to summon the Riotous Rothe, and we get the damage of this boss dummy with it then. Now, it's not that simple because unfortunately, which is very annoying for these tests, these bosses and all the enemies here and in PvE in general, the bosses have random base damage, which means they have randomness in how much damage they actually deal per hit. So we just need to sit here for like 10 minutes plus and get an average test to get the average amount of damage that the guy's doing. Do that with and then without the companion, and what we ended up with does confirm that it works. So that's pretty good. You can see without the debuff, 1601 median base damage, so this was the most hits were on that value. And then with the Riotous Rothe, we were indeed seeing less damage, down to 1441, which is, if we do the math, equal to a 10% damage reduction. Now, I can't really test with multiple of them and stacking against PvE enemies, but in all likelihood, the system's going to work the same so that it's going to stack exactly like it does against, say, a player in PvP, resulting in you being able to stack a lot of these companions, reducing the damage of bosses significantly. And his uptime on that ability is pretty much 100%. Like, as soon as it expires off the enemy, he's pretty much right there doing it again. The cooldown is only 10 seconds, but I don't believe he can refresh it when it's active, as it lasts 30 seconds, but it never seems to increase the time remaining. Just when it falls off, he can reapply it again. So it is currently broken in the way that you can stack him multiple times, and on top of that, giving a 10% damage reduction debuff that's multiplicative outside of other damage reduction debuffs. Usually they stack up and add up together and reduce the damage, meaning you reduce the effectiveness of each one you add on. But this is multiplicative, so it's going to multiply separately each time, and this is also being a full 10% versus bosses, rather than what I assume it should be at only 3%, as that would be more in line with other damage reduction support companions. Now again, completely broken right now, particularly because you can stack them up to, like reducing the enemy's damage down to 35% of their original damage. So if the boss would deal 1,000,000 damage per hit, now he's only going to deal 350,000. Meaning easily a DPS could tank that. With some healers, no problem. Definitely needs fixing so that he's only 3%. Whether he stacks or not with itself, that's actually not a big issue if it's only 3%. But you can see a partial list of my table here with the support companions and the other damage reduction ones. The ones that would give survivability to your team are there, and the Riotous Rothe in his bug form is totally outperforming all of them. They're usually only 3% damage reduction or 3% defense or 5% maximum hit point shield, and they all have their limitations and radiuses, and otherwise this is just going to affect the boss. Doesn't matter where you are, as long as it's the boss dealing damage, the damage is going to be reduced. Again, he'll roar here and stick the debuff on the enemy. Totally needs to get fixed, but this companion did come pretty cheap from the Winter Festival. You just had to play it a little bit and you could get it. So probably a lot of you have it. Now otherwise, there's probably going to be farmers who have a lot of them just sitting in their storage. So don't get fooled and tricked by people inflating the price temporarily on the auction house to millions. That's just going to drop down over time, even in its bugged state, and we'll see what happens. I don't expect it to stay like this for very long, as it just is going to trivialize content so easily. But once again, hopefully this was somewhat insightful. Now you know why people could be running this companion, why they might be using this and stacking it. It does work to reduce the boss's damage by 10% per companion. So thanks for watching, and a massive thank you to all of these channel members for your added support. We'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.